5 years ago, actually 5 years ago, I spoke about this statement and it had not been released yet. So I was imagining what it might be like. It came out in March of 2012. At the same Duster Magic, I found out that I had gotten funding from the Boeing company to start the Technology and Early Childhood Center. That was a pretty good day, right? So both of them are 5 years old. We've been celebrating 2 5-year-olds these last couple of months and trying to do some work to put the position statement back in the spotlight and to ask the question, what do we know now that we didn't know then? The statement came out in 2012. Those of you who do research and writing know that somewhere around mid-2011, we stopped reading. We had to get on to the writing, right? Well, this thing was only a year plus at that time. We didn't know the promise of this. We had a hunch. We had a pretty strong hunch that this swipe and interface for young kids was going to be the game changer, but we didn't have any evidence of that. And so that's part of the story that I'll tell. This just gives you some background on me being from Erikson Institute. We're a graduate school in child development. One of our graduates is here, Amanda Armstrong. She'll be talking to you tomorrow. And that I am also a senior fellow at the Rogers Center. So if you put those two together, I look at technology through the lens of child development and through the lens of Fred Rogers and how he used technology in his time to reach children and families in positive ways. So that's really the overlay that I bring. You know, it turns out that not all news is fake. Not all intelligence is artificial. Not all technology is digital. Not all learning is interactive, engaging, or empowering. And not all 21st century skills are new to the 21st century. But the line at the bottom is always a nudge I try to give teachers. But tech integration is so easy, even an adult can do it. And so that notion that this stuff's pretty complicated, but really it's about good teaching. So here's another one. Despite claims to the contrary, and we had many claims, and Warren's right, these claims are gathering momentum again. But we were told when we were going through the position statement process that we were going to kill childhood. We were going to kill play, forget. This was the death of play, never would a child play again. We were going to kill hands-on learning, and they really didn't find it funny at all when we suggested that this was hands-on. That was not one that they appreciated. The social interactions, forget it, kids are all going to be staring at screens, they're never going to make friends or know how to do that, and nobody's going outside again, and end of outdoor time. And some of these things are what we tried to do at the time was to be respectful of those concerns, understand where they were coming from, but not stop moving forward because of them. And since that time, we've come up with solutions, and we just were talking about apps around the room that actually address all those things and give you just the opposite reaction. So the Mark Twain quote, of course, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. I love this one. When you discover you're riding a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. And he says, I think I saw it still moving. And the prod here is around the no-tech crowd who seem to be coming back and somehow have missed the last 5 years of great thinking and development around what's appropriate and have kept us in the false dichotomy of all tech or no tech, when in fact that's not the way it works with young kids at all. So a little reminder of that. Warren will tell you that when we did public hearings on the position statement process during the 3-year process, people would sit in the front row and yell at us and tell us how evil we were because we thought technology had a place in the early years. Anybody remember the Jetsons? We are the Jetsons. It's happened, right? Alice is exercising to an image on a screen. You've got a watch with images on it, right? We're having a Skype phone call. We're reading our news on a screen. All these things have come to pass. This was 1962. So the futurists that were involved in this television program took a look ahead and they predicted the reality that we live in now. So that really encourages all of us to think, what's it going to be like 50 years from now? We don't know. One of our activities around was a timeline to think about that. Okay, this is an important one too. We talk so much about 21st century skills, but look at the list. And these are the things that show up on lots of 21st century lists. playing well with others, demonstrating self-awareness, being adaptable, being persistent, resilient, understanding multiple perspectives, and knowing, I'm going to hold off on the last one. I don't think those are 21st century skills. I think they're any century skills. I think they're first century skills. These are things we've wanted for children all along. What makes them 21st century is that kids have new tools to learn some of these things and gain these skills. But the dispositions are not new. And then the last one's really important to me, and this, I can't think of a better group to talk about this, and I think Mitch talked about this. I want kids growing up today to know they're smarter than the technology. That the smart one is the child, not the tablet. Right? The tablet's just sitting there. It's not doing anything until the smart child asks it to do something. Right? That's really important. And we need to think about how that impacts how we work with kids. This one's, I won't go through the list, you just see it. I was in Reggio Emilia in Italy, and the schools of Reggio Emilia are famous in early childhood circles for the constructivist approach they have to young children. One of the leaders of Reggio Emilia stood up and said, "You Americans always say children are the future. Here in Reggio, we say that children are right now, and the future is right now. We don't need to give them skills for the workforce 20 years from now. We need to give them the skills they need to grow and develop in a healthy way right now." Right? But we are a future-looking society. So I thought that was really, really powerful. The one I will say at the bottom, we want kids that know how to imagine out-of-the-box solutions. I think in the 21st century, kids can skip the box. Why even start in the box? Right? Start outside the box and stay outside the box. So that's really the ability to design and create, experiment, and innovate. Okay, so what have we learned since 2012? I am not going to tick through all of these, but I think it's important that you visually see what's happened. So the position statement came out in 2012, March of 2012. Since that time, a lot of other national organizations have put their flag in the sand and written position statements. From the RAND Corporation in 2014, who asked the question, can technology in early childhood education bridge the digital divide, and then wrote 6 really influential reports about it. Also in 2014, 0 to 3, which is in early childhood, that's the organization looking at the youngest children, and the youngest children are the most controversial still around technology and whether there should be screens or not. When 0 to 3 looked at the research and came out with a moderate approach to technology and young children, a thoughtful approach, it really helped our conversation. Warren knows the High Scope Foundation in 2015, they wrote a position statement around using technology appropriately in the preschool classroom. Lots of you probably know that in October of a year ago, the AAP, Council on Communications and Media, issued their latest update, Media and Young Minds. This is an interesting one to think about with the position statement, because when we were doing the writing, they issued a statement around 1999, then they issued another statement a few years later, and now this one. So we've been kind of tracking them. I'll talk a little more about that. On the same day that the American Academy of Pediatrics released their report, or their statement, the Department of Education and the Department of Health and Human Services also released guidelines and principles about technology in young children. Not just the same day, at the same event. This is like, for people who do my work, this was like the earth is moving here. What just happened? The pediatricians and the Department of Ed and the Department of Health and Social Services had a conversation and talked about, let's get these things out on the street. So that's really, really important. And then the ISTE standards have been updated for students and for educators. This quote at the bottom, I think, is important. When used intentionally and appropriately, technology and interactive media are effective tools to support learning and development. When used intentionally and appropriately. And those are 2 really big words in the position statement. Intentional, I know why I want to use technology, right? I have the why, I know why the child will benefit from this, and then appropriately it fits within the construct of developmentally appropriate practice. But of course the reverse is also true. When not used intentionally, or when used unintentionally and inappropriately, we can't expect positive outcomes for children from technology. Right? So practice and the technology come together. Just this year, earlier this year, the Fred Rogers Center and my work, the Tech Center in Chicago, released a new report. We asked the researcher, Dr. Katie Pasiga, to kind of help us try to answer this question of what do we know now that we didn't know then. And we're particularly interested in social and emotional learning. And what's the current state of technology tools for young children that promote social and emotional learning? What's interesting is that there's two answers that Katie would give you if she was here. One is we don't know all that much more now than we knew then. And part of that's the academic research cycle, right? So we are literally just seeing research-based, evidence-based reports on technology in young children coming into the literature, so that's important. But what she found on social emotional learning, which was not what we hoped she would find, is that when she found evidence of social and emotional interactions when a child used a piece of technology, it was never part of the design. It was never intended. It was never in the research methodology, right? We want to know what kids are learning. But we think very strongly that what kids are doing with these tools can be really powerful for their relationship building. And then I think there's examples of the executive summary of the Common Sense Media report that just came out last week. So this stuff keeps coming, right? There's no end. There's no stop. It keeps building. And if you've seen that, of course, the mobile is nearly universal. That's a really big shift from the last report. How kids are using media has really changed. Mobile use has tripled in the time since their last report, but the digital divide remains complicated. Ownership is better. More people, more families have access to digital technology in their homes than they did 3-4 years ago. Almost 90+%, right? So we're almost there. Everybody's got one. But how they're used and what access children have to use them in as a tool for learning varies widely by family and often by racial and economic groups as well. And so this is a big problem. Amanda will nudge us tomorrow, but one of the troubling report out of the report was that minority children tend to spend an hour and 20 minutes or so more than other children using screen media in a day. That's a lot of time, right? So if the average is 2, and then we've got kids that are spending 3, and so we make some really dangerous assumptions about how that time's being spent, and about the quality or lack of quality, or how kids are learning or not learning. We've got to be really careful. Department of Education calls this the digital use divide, and that's a really powerful term, right? People have the technology, but how it gets used is really varying. So, what have we learned? Emerging consensus on what matters most. Child development theory and developmentally appropriate practice continue to be essential to this work. Thinking about the whole child, thinking about early childhood essentials. I'll show you a slide about what I mean by that. The 3 C's from Lisa Guernsey of content, context, and child. The opportunity for kids to be creators, makers, and storytellers. Relationships are always critical, and then this idea of media mentorship. So I'm just going to kind of kick through those. So old theory informs new media, and we'll have a little play with these ideas tomorrow, but you can see some quotes up there. Montessori said education is a natural process carried out by the child and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. Piaget said play is the answer to how anything new comes about. Vygotsky said it's through others that we develop into ourselves. And Skinner added, education is what survives when what has been learned has been forgotten. Those are some powerful ideas, some big ideas. I know we're going to play with those again tomorrow. And this illustration, by the way, was in the first book, and Warren's daughter did that illustration. But I thought, given last night with Mitch, that there's also a past-forward moment around how new theory informs media. Right? So let's think about Seymour. From constructivist to constructionist. Studied with Piaget. You can't get more constructivist than that, right? But became a constructionist. What he said is, the role of the teacher or developer is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. Kids have to learn, have to want to learn, have to figure it out. And then he said, I'm convinced that the best learning takes place when the learner takes charge. We've been talking about control for the last day and a half, right? And Rita Bears, who's at Tufts University and is doing some great work with robotics and coding and computational thinking. wrote a really great paper just this year called the Seymour Test, Powerful Ideas in Early Childhood Education. And said she always has to ask herself, what would Seymour think or say or do about this? So I think Seymour's back in some really powerful ways. So the whole child matters. Cognitive language, social, emotional, physical. We're interested in the whole child. This is not just a tool for learning, therefore just a cognitive outcome, right? Number one, kids don't learn that way, but number two, we need to be more holistic. You all, as developers and designers, need to be thinking about the whole child when you're doing your development. Because otherwise, we need interactive media. It has to be designed for the whole potato. And if we design it for just some of the developmental domains, then we don't get the full thing, right? So we don't get to the Mr. Potato Head all made at the other end unless we pay attention to the whole child and all the pieces that go with it. I won't read all of these, but you can look at them as I'm talking. I think this is really critical, and this was a point we were making from the very beginning, but it wasn't being heard very well by the folks who just didn't believe we had kids' well-being in mind. What's most essential? If you think about the day in the life of a 4-year-old, or 3-year-old, right, or a 5-year-old, what's on your list of the way that child should spend their day? What's really important? What's essential? What's non-negotiable? Right? This has to happen for this child to have a great childhood. If it's non-negotiable, then it's non-negotiable and it can't go away because we introduce an iPad, right? It cannot not be emphasized because there's technology in the classroom. Technology needs to enhance these kinds of outcomes, or it isn't the right tool at the moment, and we put it down and we pick up something else, right? But that notion that these things really matter, this is what we heard from other folks was, we've got to pay attention to this. I talked about Lisa Guernsey's 3 C's, content, context, and the child. I think that's a very useful framework, simple way of thinking about something much more complicated, right? What's the content on the device? What's the context in which the child's using the device? What about the individual child, their own interests and capacities? And then I've added a fourth one around connections, because I think we were talking earlier about community and connections and the need for kids to be, again, social and to learn alongside others and to be part of a community. Here you go, this is the gift to all of you, because this is your sweet spot, right? But the research is saying to us, and all of these studies and all these position statements that have come out keep saying the same thing. In the 21st century, kids need to create media and use media to tell their story. That they don't have to be consumers of media. Now, I always want to say at that moment that I'm not saying there will never be consumption anymore, because that's not realistic. Because we're all going to go back to our rooms at the end of the night, and if you're interested in football, you're going to turn on Monday Night Football and you're just going to sit and watch it, right? We consume media, that's okay. We just want to move from that being the only thing that kids are doing, is passive consumption. So really, how do we think about how they make meaning with media, create media, and do digital storytelling? I was talking in the group in the back earlier that in our work, we're really excited about storytelling apps that are really open-ended, right? Because it allows the child to show me what they know, right? To demonstrate their learning, to tell their story, to share their story with their parents by email, to have video and audio and photos. These are the affordances of the device, right? It's not app-driven, it's device-driven, it's capacity. Now we're back to, right, who's the smart one? The smart one is the kid who can tell their story on one of these and share it with somebody else. That's the smart kid. Okay, this is a little fun.
Gene, we have a situation brewing with carbon dioxide.
We need a CO2 filter problem on the limb module.
5 filters on the limb, which meant for 2 guys for a day and a half. So I told the doctor,
They're already up to 8 on the gauges. Anything over 15, you get impaired judgment, blackouts, the beginnings of brain asphyxia.
What about the scrubbers on the command module?
it takes square cartridges. The ones on the limb around.
Tell me this isn't government operation.
It's just isn't a contingency we remotely looked at.
Those CO2 levels are going to be getting toxic.
Well, I suggest you gentlemen invent a way to put a square peg in a round hole. Rapidly.
Okay, people, listen up. People upstairs handed us this one, and we gotta come through. We gotta find a this, using nothing but that. Let's get it organized. Let's get some coffee going.
I'm thinking those guys were makers when they were kids. I'm thinking they had Lego sets and erector sets and other things and that they made, right? I love the clip because it captures that moment of, this is an impossible task, but let's get at it. Let's figure it out. We don't have a choice. And so that notion of a challenge that needs to be addressed, loose parts that are available, and kids' interest in learning and working together, I think that's a great example. So we know from Fred Rogers that what mattered most to him was relationships. We hold that true as well. It was really the number one active ingredient in the successful use of a young child using technology is relationships with others. We know that young children learn best in the context of interactions and relationships with attentive, responsive, and caring adults. Can be parents, can be other adult family members, can be teachers. We should use tech to promote healthy social and emotional development. So these are nudges to all of you who are developers. How do you invite interactions in the way in which you create your app that encourage kids to play together or encourage a parent to come through? How do you use it to strengthen the relationship between the adult and the child rather than to put up a barrier, which is often what people perceive is going to happen, right? This doesn't have to be between us. This can be between us, right? A different meaning. Encourage pro-social behaviors, learning to take turns, all of those things. What we know from the early literacy literature and research is that using media together leads to more learning. When you read a book to a child, that's a richer language experience than when the child just looks at a book. Why is that any different? When you play a game, play an app, work on the iPad or other technology with the child, it's a richer experience. Interactional quality matters, so we're really wanting a high level of engagement. Socially contingent interactions matter. We both care about what each other thinks and does. It can be adjacent. One of the messages that came out of the AAP was more joint media engagement. Parents need to spend more time with their kids, and the younger the child, the higher percentage of the child's screen time needs to have an adult mediator, right? Nice idea. It's not very realistic. It's not going to happen that way in every home, right? So I think we need to give parents some other ways of thinking about being connected. We talk about adjacent viewing, we talk about dialogic apping. The child can be on a device and playing, and I'm making dinner. I can ask questions. What are you doing now? What character's on the screen? What's they're doing? And of course I love the question, and what are we going to do when we turn it off? Because there's always a state of off at some point, right? So just that notion of helping parents understand some of these things I think are important. That leads to this one, the elephant in the room. AAP said, because parent media use is a strong predictor of child media habits, reducing parental media use and enhancing parent-child interactions may be an important area of behavior change. Randy Pausch of the last lecture fame said, when there's an elephant in the room, introduce him. So I would like to introduce you to the elephant in the room, which is how we as adults use media in front of children. That's the elephant, right? And how parents are using media in front of kids, because the kids are watching, and the parent's the most important person in their life, and so they're going to learn that this is how you use media. You ignore people, you stare at the screen and stop talking, right? You do all of these things. So remember, we started with Fred Rogers. Fred would not want us to be critical of parents for these behaviors. He'd want us to find a way to empower parents to change their own behaviors, to see the benefits of using media. Instead of saying, put the damn phone down and talk to your child, he probably would have said something more like, I notice you have a phone, and I notice there's a child. Did you know? And then show a way that that can be a connection instead of a disconnection. So we've got some work to do. You know this from airplanes. Adults need to put their mask on first. Before you help the child next to you put your own mask on, we need to put our own masks on. We need to get this figured out. We need to look at our own behavior. Parent media use strongly predicts how children use media. The adults need to be aware of the impact of images, sounds, and screens have on young children. Okay, so there's another one that I was going to talk about last night that I think is really important. There's all kinds of screen media. And one kind that I'm really concerned about in the wake of Las Vegas and hurricanes and wildfires is that these little screens of ours are filled with horrific images 24/7. Kids, I'm not playing with my kid on my phone, but my phone is right here, right? We used to be able to just say, turn off the TV and you know, get your kid away from those images, but the images are now on my watch and here and on my iPad and on my computer. We have to be more vigilant about what children are seeing. Children are suffering from, but they're learning about, plugged in and distracted parenting, parenting without presence, which just breaks my heart. You know what that means, right? Physically present, but emotionally absent. One of the hardest states for any child to be in with any adult is the adult is here, but they're not available, right? And so that can happen with media. Always on media, so that notion of turn it off. The secondhand smoke of the digital age is what I talk about, background TV, right? It's just filling their world. But adults need messages that affirm, encourage, empower, and nudge. We've got to help positively. What's the role of developers in nudging parents about how to use your product to connect with your children, how to use it differently. I love this one, first line from China, public service announcement. The more you connect, the less you connect. Think about that.
So, Confucius say.
The more you connect, the less you connect. But it works in reverse. The more we connect, the less I connect. Right? It can go either way. It's a powerful idea, but connection is around choice, right? Our colleague from Chicago says, spend less time monitoring and more time mentoring. I think that's a powerful idea. I want parents to be the first responders. Children need their adults to be tuned in and attentive, engaged digital tour guides, mindful media users, media literacy role models. It's a fast-moving society. Our colleague Michael Rich from Boston Children's Hospital says this, what we owe our kids is a rich and diverse experience. Our focus should be on living well with media rather than opposing or restricting it. That's pretty good. Living well with media. If that's our goal, and everyone in the room is going to define that differently, and that's fine, right? Within your own context, your own family, what does it mean to live well with media? There's not one answer to that. But the goal of living well and having media help us instead of hurt us, I think is really important. So I'll wrap up with a provocation. Every child needs a media mentor. Every parent and family needs a media mentor. Every educator needs to be a media mentor. Who's going to mentor the mentors? How are we going to get there, right? And then one more metaphor about the turtle on a fence post. When you see a turtle on a fence post, it didn't get there by itself, right? So all I've got up here is my wish list for who can get engaged in media mentorship for young children. And basically, I'm throwing us all in the bucket, right? Adults who have children around them can help young children navigate the digital age, can help show children how to use these tools positively. But we have to be intentional about that. It's not random, it's something that we have to know how to do. And I'll just leave you there. So, thanks. It's been an interesting 5 years.